Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all, this time covering Peter Ackroyd's The Life of Thomas More. So this is a biography of Thomas More, who, if you don't know anything about Thomas More, he was a historical figure, a scholar and lawyer and essentially politician, worked as the Lord Chancellor for a time for Henry VIII, and then eventually fell from political favor over his principled reaction to Henry VIII's attempts at divorcing his wife and then also, or rather, annulling the marriage with his wife, and then marrying a new woman. The whole story of Anne Boleyn, and then also of separating the Anglican Church from the Catholic Church, and positioning himself as the leader of the church in England, which of course was a big deal at the time. Thomas More eventually, after his position of political favor, lost that favor, and through a whole series of unfortunate incidents and political pressure, resisted and all that sort of stuff, comes to the end of his story where he is beheaded on orders of the king, as a traitor to the crown and the kingdom and all that sort of stuff. So, interesting fellow. This is a biography of Thomas More that runs 500 something pages, and is fairly detailed, and I think in particular, excuse me, makes good use of the literary sources, I guess how I would describe it. There's a lot of material in here that is direct quotations from the English language writings of the period, oftentimes without any type of updated spelling or anything like that. But it is, by this late 15th, early 16th century writing, is definitely close enough to be totally, I would say, readable for a modern reader. Sometimes there's kind of odd elements, or there's a one quirk is that a lot of cases there are what we would spell something with a V, where it's just a U that is used, and so you have to differentiate between U's that are actually used and U's that are pronounced like V's. A classic problem of historical orthography. But I think it adds a lot to the flavor of the book. This use of the original writings of Thomas More and of a number of other people around him. This very kind of textual additions to the biography are really excellent, and add a lot, at least as far as I'm concerned. Um, the Probably the weakest element of the biography is that there is not very much about the kind of aftermath of Moore's life. The title really is, as it says, the life of Thomas More. It is from his birth through to his death, with relatively little material about his kind of role in the culture afterwards. There are some mentions of it. For instance, there's a Elizabethan era play about Thomas More, of which one of the most famous sections was almost certainly written by William Shakespeare, even though the rest of the play probably wasn't. But that little bit probably is one of the early Shakespeare bits, and so there's a discussion of what Moore says in the play. That unfortunately the play is not very good history, and so there's a discussion of the way that the actual kind of historical events of this riot in London go a little bit differently than they are presented in the play. But it is an interesting bit of kind of connection between the events of More's own life with his kind of presence in history and literature after his death. And to be honest, that's probably the only thing that I would say that there ought to be more of in this book, because I think it's really interesting to see some of the kind of the the little small glimpses of that in the book itself are really interesting. And I think about some of the other sort of similar books that I've read. Like there's a historical biography of El Cid that I read last year that spent a lot of time on that type of material, the kind of figure of El Cid, not just in his own period in history, but as a kind of historical symbol in later periods. That's really interesting, and I think adds a lot. And like I said, there's not a whole lot of that in this book, although there's a little bit of it. But so much of the rest of the material is, I think, really, really fascinating. This Moore is presented as a really kind of an unusual character. He is this kind of balance between his sort of ascetic tendencies, his attachment to monastic lifestyle, but also his ultimate rejection of these ideas. There's a great little passage where it describes Peter Ackroyd describes Thomas More's reaction to kind of the behaviors of his own father. Thomas More himself writing this little sort of aphoristic passage about the idea of the necessity of corporal punishment used on children as disciplinary measures, but that is tempered with two details that are from his daughter's writings that Thomas More himself preferred, rather than using a stick the same diameter as the father's thumb, which was the traditional limitation, that he would use peacock feathers to strike his children, essentially to communicate displeasure without doing any, right? It's just a feather; it doesn't do any actual damage. Or similarly, Margaret, his daughter, records that Thomas More, in her memory, only was actually angry in her presence twice in her life, which is really it's a touching moment in the book. This comparison and relationship between his kind of sense of filial piety and his sort of buying into some of the more negative qualities of his period, while being sort of tempered with his own conscience. That I think his particular this blend of contradicting impulses within him is, I think, a lot of what is being gotten at, and is illuminating for the eventual end of his life. His principled rejection of Henry VIII's attempts to establish the Anglican Church, and his ideas about the nature of what the church ought to be in the future, and Thomas More's ultimate rejection of this division of the church. And in particular, there's a lot of point made about Thomas More in this era, this kind of last gasp of sort of medieval Christendom, in a sense, this period immediately leading up to the Reformation, and then eventually even after Martin Luther has posted his theses, and the German Peasants' War has gone off, and Europe is being gradually more and more wrapped up in the chaos of Reformation and the eventual division of the Catholic Church into Protestant and Catholic, and then also the kind of growing political power and centralization of these authorities, the kings of Europe, taking a new level of control over their things, and this idea of Thomas More as this kind of complex this sort of figure of the king's conscience at this kind of last stage of the medieval world as it transforms into modernity is really interesting, and I think it is part of why the story of Thomas More ends up being um, compelling and touching and feels like it is worth engaging with, beyond all of his other little details. And there's a little bit about like his writing of Utopia, which is a book that he wrote. He wrote a number of other things, all these different kind of homilies and these different kind of political and religious polemics, all of these different things that he wrote down and put out into the world in an era where mass printing was still a fairly new technology, and so it was a big deal to be able to publish things like this, rather than creating a manuscript and then just waiting for it to be copied or something like that. So it was a real you know again, this period of transformation in the world is a sort of continually recurring theme of his life, which I guess turns us all the way through to the eventual end of Thomas More. The story comes to a close with his death, and his kind of final days in the tower are a really kind of remarkable capstone on the full discussion of his life. It's like I said, it's a compelling narrative of a complicated man living in a complicated world, a man for all seasons, as he was described. So, yeah, Life of Thomas More is a recommendation from me. And if you have opinions about Sir Thomas More, or about this book or any other of the books discussed here, or if you have a suggestion for another thing that is relevant to read, anything like that, leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I've been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.